Welcome. I'm Harmony Slater, your host of the Finding Harmony podcast. Over the past 20 years, I've taught thousands of yoga teachers and students to explore the intersection between ancient wisdom and modern everyday life, using mind-body practices to heal, awaken, and manifest their dreams from the inside out. This podcast is a sanctuary for those feeling overwhelmed by life's challenges. Are you ready to jump in and discover how these challenges aren't actually in the way, but are the way to finding harmony? Let's invite the magic back in. Hello, and welcome to the Finding Harmony podcast. It's a new year, it's a new season, and I'm so happy you're here joining us. We are about to kick off 2024 with an incredible guest who's a dear old friend of ours that we all met in Mysore years ago. But now she is Dr. Jean Bryne. She is also a research fellow who specializes in developing mind-body interventions for mental health. She also owns a 17-year-old yoga school called The Yoga Space with her partner, who also is a doctorate, Dr. Rob Schultz in Perth, Australia. The two of them are a power couple, but we are meeting with Jean today to dive into some of her research, what she has discovered through researching mind-body interventions and yoga, and also her experience over the years with her own personal practice. She is a mother of 2 children, as well as a highly acclaimed researcher and scholar, and she's writing chapters in books, as well as doing all kinds of things, as well as running a yoga school and maintaining her own practice. So how does she do it all? We are going to find out. And if you've ever wondered if the yoga practice really works and what it's doing to you, we are going to find out today. And maybe you've had the question, what's better, Iyengar yoga, Bikram yoga, Ashtanga yoga, Shivananda yoga? Well, you're also going to find out the answer to that question in this interview today based on the research. And if you've ever also had the question, wondering what's more effective, is it meditation, is it breath work, is it asana? We're also going to try to come to the bottom of that question as well. So today is a wonderful, wonderful conversation. And if you would like to receive a 2-minute free breathwork practice, I would love for you to head on over to my website, harmonyslater.com, and you can download that beautiful practice right now. And it goes along so perfectly with this episode, because it gives you an immediate way to disrupt that pattern in your nervous system of reacting or holding stress and tension, and it can help you relax throughout the day. It only takes 2 minutes to start to regulate your nervous system, and we're going to learn all about the benefits of doing that in this episode with Jean Bryne. So let's get started. Hi, welcome to the Finding Harmony podcast. I'm here today with Russell Kay.
Is this the new intro and the new sound, this one?
Yes.
It is? Everyone's already heard the new music?
Because it's a new year, yes. And we're so excited because today...
An old mate.
Yes, we're speaking with
Busy
Jean.
mates.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm really well. It's really nice to see you both. It's been, Russell said 20 years. Harmony, maybe it's been 10.
I think 10, yeah.
I think, with the last time that we spoke, we were all married to different people. Is that correct?
I'm married to the same person. Actually, I went to Mysore for the first time married to that person. We drove
that guy?
Yeah, we drove across the border from Singapore to Malaysia, got married, and I flew back to Australia while he stayed there the same day. And yeah, it seemed to work out.
That guy, Rob? That guy?
That guy, Rob. Yep.
Oh, my God.
23 years, you said?
About 23, yeah.
Is
Amazing.
he still really tall and good-looking, that guy?
He's still tall and
smart,
good-looking.
right? He was educated? He had like a PhD or something ridiculous.
in psychology and pain. And he's a research fellow and a clinical psychologist at a hospital. So and he teaches a bit of yoga.
That is intimidating as
like
well.
a side job.
Yeah. Retreats, mainly silent retreats, which are nice. Yeah.
Silent retreats.
You know, at the time, I remembered the two of you, as being a kind of power couple, but also like the archetype of what we were all to aspire to. Just like we should all have a PhD in yoga studies. We should be married. We should be wholesome. We should be Australian. That seemed to help. And then I was like, that's what I wanted. And I think we all kind of felt like that was the thing that we should be actively pursuing, don't you think, Harm?
I don't know. I don't think that pursuing a PhD was
No, a marriage, a perfect kind of square marriage.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think sometimes you take quite a bizarre road to get there. And, you know, it is interesting when we always had that feedback in Mysore because we started going there together and there was a steadiness in that for us, but people aren't living in our brains, which are, the outward steadiness belies an inward fluctuation on the daily.
Of course. Yeah.
But that is something we went all in on. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's so cool because you both are like these academic giants. I mean, in our community, really.
Compared to the very small.
You really were able to maintain practice, going to Mysore, starting a yoga school, like I think 17 years ago.
Yep.
And also continuing your education, getting masters, getting PhDs, getting even more, another master's.
Really.
Yeah. So my first real question is how were you able to balance all of these different things? Because it takes a lot to run a yoga school. It also, and you also have 2 children.
Yeah.
I think she said that there was some fluctuation.
Yeah, there's fluctuations, but still, I mean, you're both highly successful, basically having 3 or 4 jobs each.
Essentially, yes. And I think that's a bit of an issue now that we're getting older. And maybe I think for us, this sense of balance, it's elusive and it comes in waves. So there's a steadiness, but there's this consistent fluctuating. And I think being able to do it together and being grounded in a daily, this being grounded in a daily sadhana is, I think, what changes everything. And I suppose that's what a lot of your listeners will know as well. And now, the research that we do, it's just so clear. Yoga works on dose and it impacts our capacity to concentrate or our mental health, our physical health. So I think without that ground, things would get really, really shaky.
Did you say that yoga works on dose?
Yeah.
That's what you said?
It's like medicine.
I've never heard that expression before. Works on dose. Like a dose of yoga helps.
Like if you are told to take antibiotics and you need to take a certain course. So what the research showing on how yoga works for your mental health and your physical health is that it's important to be consistent with it. So the dose that you get, as in the length of time and the regularity, that is going to be related to how it impacts your anxiety, your depression, your hypertension, your asthma, your ADHD, all of these things.
Wow.
That's so interesting. And tell us more about this research.
Okay.
How do you know this for sure?
Well, I think one good thing to think about is, a lot of people have a problem with the yoga research that's happening in the West and say things like, these scholars have barely dipped their toes in the ocean of yoga, I think was one of the quotes. This research started in India, and you would know this, at Kavalyadam.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so post-colonial India, people started testing yoga. So how do we know it? Because there's different levels of evidence and research. And essentially now people in their search for kind of accessible and affordable healthcare have realized that people are practicing yoga because it gives them this physical and emotional sense of well-being. So people have started studying it. And it's like mindfulness or meditation. There's been 3 decades worth of research now. And in the last decade, the yoga research is just absolutely booming. Yeah, so that's what we're working on over here.
Amazing. And especially I think like breathwork research has really exploded too. I mean, and it even started with like meditation and mindfulness and like all of the mind body practices, I think, right? People are really interested in how they're affecting our emotions.
Exactly. And we would notice from being in India, there's this long tradition, even though perhaps how we might understand yoga is, you know, maybe not what yoga was in India, but there's a bidirectional relationship between the mind and body. And very few modern therapies address that bidirectional relationship, but yoga does, even more than, say, sitting meditation, because there's movement. So, yeah.
Did you hear at all about the Stanford research study on the effects of yoga as a dose on middle school children?
I don't know it well, but it worked, right?
It did.
Yeah,
it did.
That's my understanding.
So my job was to coordinate the school teachers. And make sure that they, that they were all right. They would, they'd call me at 8:30 at night, complaining about, pregnancy and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so I just made sure they got to the job and did the thing, and then we measured them and made sure that the scientists weren't too much in their way.
Yeah.
But the most incredible, the most statistically significant result was language acquisition.
Yeah.
Is that there was a very demonstrable effect on the ability of children to acquire language, which was really kind of out of left field. I didn't expect that, But,
I think things like that, if we think about our kids, when people are regulated, and I don't know if you've heard of polyvagal theory, but when people are in that kind of social connected and calm state, they can just take on a lot more information. And so you asked about how I did all these things. I think it was practice, that consistent regulator. And that's not why when I started practice, and I know that, with your study as well, Harmony, you were a bit like this. I was quite interested I went quite out there, because I started with psychedelic, and then I got into intense meditation, then studying religion at uni, this whole kind of more transcendent approach. And what I started to realize is, this transpersonal psychology idea, if you want to, you can't transcend the self without a solid sense of self. And so I think as you're saying, Russell, this regulated, calm nervous system can just take in so much more, but it's like people want to skip over that part of getting really calm and steady and get to, these kind of expansive states of consciousness. But how useful are they if we don't have that steadiness?
Yeah, that's interesting.
That reminds me a lot of the people that we spoke to in Brazil who seem to have a rather robust approach to people who are having emergent experiences through psychedelics and spiritual experiences, and they really try and provide a mechanism for them to say adjust to the experience.
Yeah.
Which is whereas in the United States you might just have a set break in the middle of a Grateful Dead concert, and that's all you really get.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's because we're not seeing people as whole people, we're not understanding that, the history, whether it's, their adverse childhood events and things they've experienced or trauma, and then the initiating events like you're talking about, and then things start to emerge. And I think we've all experienced these really difficult moments in life, and sometimes it's hard for us to know exactly what we need and to access the right support, which is why having this container of practice becomes so, for me at least, so steadying.
Yeah.
I was going to comment a bit, maybe you could speak to this further, is that both Harmony and I had very kind of intense emergent experiences with psychedelics that were extremely uncomfortable. And then, you try and figure out like, what do you do with this? This knowledge now that was not wanted, and yet here we have it, and we have to kind of then, continue to interact with our parents in a positive way. Did you find, maybe Harmony could speak more on that, and I didn't mean to interrupt her, but were you also finding that that seems a fairly typical arc, to do psychedelics, then get into a spiritual practice, like George Harrison, taught us to do, and then, to study yoga more intensively? Were you having experiences that were quite uncomfortable in that first triad?
In the psychedelic period?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my psychedelic period when I was a teenager. So from 15 to 17, and which I obviously really do not recommend for teenagers and developing brains. Not a good idea.
Right.
And I think I had a lot of anxiety and, my loving family, but totally dysregulated household. I was just, I don't know. I think it was like true. And I think it's hard to find the exact words for it, the kind of constellation of experience, but that's what led me to yoga and meditation, because I remember just understanding that there was a falsity to the entire world that I was participating in. And it was like a truth that didn't have words, but it was felt, and it was just in me. And inverted, there was a knowing. And so for me, similarly. So at 17, I remember sitting in my dingy apartment because I'd moved out of home, and I was like, right, I'm going to do this without LSD. And I just started meditating, and that's what led me 30 years ago to yoga, is this sense that there must be something more. Yeah.
I think it's interesting. I mean, I think there's kind of like the light and the dark side of those experiences, and maybe it's kind of plays out in what we all naturally experience, but more so when you're kind of aware of the illusion that we're living in, and it can become quite desolate and desperate at some times when you're like, this is all fucking meaningless.
It is. I reckon what happens in that moment, and I feel like this is what taught me, and I was under 18, it's not a really good time to be learning this lesson, was this sense of complete surrender. Like it's like the fist like this. And if you don't if I didn't just completely yield, that resistance made things very, very difficult. And it was interesting to learn that through such a kind of forceful substance, because when we learn that through yoga and meditation, it's much gentler. I think it's much more advisable. It's much gentler. And I don't know, but for me, it served me like giving birth, for example. It was a similar sort of, I just have to give over completely. Yeah.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I felt like the experience in hindsight as a 15-year-old being given an enormous amount of LSD was quite a lot like, say, a kind of traumatizing early sexual experience or witnessing abuse by your parents. It's like there is all that's left of your personality is the witness. And you have this thing and you're a witness to it, and it's like, oh, this is really what it means to be an adult. I was just so much aware of the before and after of that experience, that I was never the same again, and I'm now kind of awake.
And that's why I think psychedelics got shut down. Well, besides the whole socio-political context and the war on drugs, the way in which, unfortunately, some really prominent teachers were using them was so irresponsible. And, as you know, at the moment, my role is in the research role is designing mind-body interventions, so whether that's yoga interventions for mental health, or at the moment designing a mindfulness intervention for people with persistent pain to take alongside psychedelic-assisted therapy with psilocybin. And I think one of the issues is the way in which these substances have been used recreationally, because people aren't being prepared for these experiences appropriately, and they're not being debriefed appropriately. So the way psychedelic-assisted therapy works, at least in Australia, and it's just emerging, is you have to do therapy with a clinical psychologist to prepare you. Then you have two clinical psychologists in a room with you, and you debrief a few times, few sessions, then you do it again. And then I think the way it's being seen potentially working for pain is it creates this window of neuroplasticity. So it creates this window which the
Right.
brain can start to change, and whether that's for trauma or pain or depression. But if you don't have the container, then it's really difficult. And it's the same with practice. Like sometimes we just need, for me at least, I need to do a doctor system for a long period of time. And that started with Vipassana, and then it was Zazen, and then Ashtanga yoga, because it just holds you, right? So it's just contained, there's parameters, and then you can settle into that. And I think psychedelic assisted therapy is the same, which is why if you just go hardcore once or a few times, or you're young and you don't have the support, that's what I did. But fortunately, I was with it was always just one or two people, very, very close friends. It was always very deep.
Right.
So I could safely just relinquish.
Yeah. That was always my favorite experience, was like one or two people and like in a place that I felt very comfortable.
Yeah.
Safe, warm.
The few times that I got high or experimented in a party situation or a group situation, I always ended up like leaving like almost immediately and going somewhere alone.
And I feel like that with practice now. Like every now and then I'll go to a yoga space class because I know everyone, or I'll jump online and do a class. I did that yesterday. But mostly I don't practice with Rob so much anymore. I just like to practice alone on my deck. Yeah.
Yeah. In the heat, in the Australian heat.
Australian heat.
But let's talk a little bit about that, because I think that's super interesting, probably informed even the work that you're doing now too. Like the Ashtanga method is so intense.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, let's be honest, if you're doing it like correct method, traditional style, it takes like an hour and a half minimum to go through one series.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how we all learned and were taught and, groomed to teach the correct method from Mysore, India.
It's a high dose.
And and so that's
big
like
dose.
how
it works.
Yeah, it's a big dose, and that's how you also like practiced and taught for many years. But now your practice obviously is quite different. What are some of the things that kind of came in and helped you change that type of practice? And I know like a lot of people really struggle with like guilt and shame, like, oh, I only did sun salutations today, I didn't practice, or they're concerned they're going to lose their practice, or like there's all kinds of stuff that comes up. And because you teach.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I was lucky because I started Ashtanga with a very stable meditation practice, and I went off and practiced a lot of restorative yoga. So while I was really into it, I remember being in Bali, and Rolf Narakat was always very understanding. But, Rob rocked up one day and he's like, "Where's Jean?" And Rob was like, "She's having a holiday." And Rob was like, "Oh, ladies' holiday, your period."
Yeah.
And Rob was like, "No, just holiday." So I was very into it, but I had that background, and I also wasn't very physically talented. Like I could go to Mysore for 6 months, but it took me 11 years to put my leg behind my head. Like things didn't come very easily for me. And I think that in itself was a really good lesson. And then having children was another lesson. I did go back to Mysore really intensely a lot with kids. I wanted to reinvigorate my practice. But I think I had this sense, even before studying psychology, that I wanted them to be securely attached. And Rob and I wanted to have that kind of responsiveness. And so yoga our practice had to shift to accommodate that. But there was still the years of doing a bit too much, lots of injuries, so many injuries, from repetitive movement. Because if you're not doing all the third series and fourth series, you're doing primary and intermediate all the time. And then for me, after having kids, I was like, tired. So just too much primary. So I started what I had to do is after me to hit the Ashtanga community, I'd quite a lot pulled back on practicing Ashtanga, particularly strictly, because in my head was Sharat and Patabi Joyce's voices. And I really wanted my practice to be my own. And so that's not there anymore. But, I am grateful to Sharat for he was generous with me when I practiced with him, but I needed to own my own practice. And it's this fine line, I think, when you're new to practice, it's difficult, is you do need some discipline. Like you said, you need that dose. You need a container and you need a dose. But you also need to be in a situation where you are aware of what your body needs.
Yeah.
But I think that takes time to develop. It takes time to develop what you do need. So it's kind of how the journey has been for me. And then perimenopause kicks in.
Right, yeah.
What is that like?
Tell everyone what happens. Everyone wants to know.
Well, this is one day where you haven't menstruated for 12 months.
Yeah.
So women or people who menstruate, they menstruate. And then the first thing that happened for me is my period started to go weird. Well, I was infertile. Yeah. I couldn't get pregnant with my second kid for like 7 years. And my period started to go weird. And then you start to have weight gain and skin changes. And then I became anemic, but I didn't know my hair was falling out. And then I felt a lot of rage and anger. Now, because, I mean, I had that when I was younger. And a lot of inflammation in the body, hot flushes, inability to sleep, have your period for 40 days and then don't have it for 6 months. So lots, and that's still going on, and that can go on for women for about 7 years. And I think what happens, it's a decline in estrogen. So there's fluctuating hormones. So it's like going through the onset of menstruation, like when you're a teenager, and nobody talks.
But worse.
About it. Yeah.
What's worse for me?
I feel like instead of like feeling like you're stepping into your you're like a beautiful radiant goddess woman, you're sort of like prepping yourself to embrace, like, I'll say, like the wise old crone, you know, archetype, which our society really doesn't celebrate, right?
Doesn't, and I think women turn it in on themselves when they're going through these changes because they want to live up to societal expectations, or their partners, or their kids, or their work, or their yoga teachers, which is pretty, sorry, I won't swear, messed up.
Yeah.
Are you not swearing on purpose?
I don't know. We swear a lot in Australia.
You're allowed to swear on this podcast.
Oh.
Yeah, we swear a lot in Australia.
Yeah, we encourage swearing.
I would say, just as an aside, in the first time that I taught in Australia, I went up to someone and I was explaining to them how to do a posture. I think it was like Marichasana D. And I was like, if you put your foot here, you just turn it in a little bit, you will get the effect that you're looking for. And she said, fuck off.
Sure. And, oh my God, really? Fuck off. Like,
that's
really?
what that means. Yeah. Right. Now, I know now that's what that means. Then, when she told me to fuck off, I said, oh, I think you just want me to fuck off.
Yeah.
Woo!
So, yeah, I mean, that's the thing too, right? If you're teaching yoga, there's some pressure there to kind of keep up and maintain a certain standard of
I think there is in the Ashtanga community, for sure. Yeah. And when I would start going back to my story, I would have a lot of people comment on my weight, actually.
Right.
Those fuckers.
Yeah. Like really regularly comment on my weight. And even like maybe one of the, I can't remember it wasn't Sharat, but even a local was like, oh, if you were my wife, I would, or if you were my sister-in-law, I would, something or other about me being fat. And it was pretty consistent happening after the kids. And I think I think in Ashtanga, people forget this notion, at least this is what I believe, that form is emptiness and emptiness is form. Like the form is important, but it's inherently empty. Like it's not, it's, in my opinion, I know lots of Ashtangis are going to agree with me, but maybe in the same way they've changed their opinions on practice, maybe in another 10 years, they'll change their opinions on the history of Ashtanga. It's not an old system. It's a system that works for me and a lot of people, but it doesn't mean it's really old. I don't feel like it's functional, but it works. And I don't know if it works for me because I've been doing it 17 or 20 years, or I don't know if it works because there's something inherent to it. And nobody knows the answer to that question.
Yeah.
But the way in which the Ashtanga system is set up as a hierarchy of performance is really problematic. And
Yes.
people have internalized value systems. And as someone who never got certified and wasn't the person that people were like, oh my God, your practice is so amazing. It was always interesting to watch. I go back and then, I decide after 5 years of having kids, all right, I might go to lead intermediate because I was just doing whatever I needed. And Shrap actually always respected that. And people would be like, oh my God, you've made it into the lead intermediate class. Congratulations. And I would be like, yeah, like 15 years ago, I haven't wanted to do this. And it's like the shock. But how could you not want to do this? Because you're so special when your body does these things. And I think people are just getting really fancy postures. But then I see people just constantly blowing their lives up and just not steady and can't, just enjoy the one life that they have. Because there's this, like you're saying, this guilt and this obsession. And I think as teachers, we need to be so careful that we're not feeding into that.
Yeah. It's hard because, like you say, it's embedded within the system itself. And so even if you are very conscious of it and doing your best not to feed into it, I do have the suspicion that when you're really like bought into the system, you can't help but reinforce that hierarchical nature because it is within the method itself if you're practicing in that way that it's taught in Mysore, India.
If you can't do handstands, how are you going to fucking teach?
Right? Like and that itself is a bit of a paradox because like you say, the yoga works in that, your nervous system's more regulated. People are having a more positive experience of their life in many ways. And, they're making healthier choices in many ways for themselves, often. Sometimes not, but often. and yet that kind of buying into this status of the body, right? Being able to do certain things and then unconsciously connecting that to levels of success.
Yeah.
Or enlightenment or advancement.
And I think there's an inherent ableism and privilege there. So yes, if you are, well attached to your parents and financially secure and all of that, of course you can go to Mysore for multiple times over your lifetime. And in the same way, if you're physically gifted, then you are just going to move through this system and get seniority quicker. And for me, I think it's also reflective of the larger conversations that are happening in the world where a multitude of perspectives, very difficult for people to hold, whether it's in a conversation about politics or whether it's in how we might best practice Ashtanga yoga. And I even saw on the internet the other day, someone here in Perth said there's no pure Ashtanga yoga, in Perth. And it's like, well, what is pure? And the notion that there is this static history of yoga that has not been evolving with traditions and philosophical systems constantly in conversation with each other and then exported and imported back. Yoga's been in this constant state of change. And so I suppose for me, I'm feeling quite comfortable now, however many years, 27, 28 years into practice, to start to, for example, one of the things I do is I design sequences. So I design interventions. And with Clin Sykes, with yoga teachers, I think actually Mark Roberts helped in the last one, and Oliver Crossley and a physiotherapists, a few other people, and their input to help design sequences that we think, based on the evidence, are going to work for people's mental health. And, in some schools of yoga, that's just heresy.
Right.
Yeah, it is the definition of heresy.
Yeah, it is the definition of heresy.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. So tell me more about that. If, is it for like if someone's experiencing depression or someone's having anxiety?
Sciatica.
Is there physical things as well?
Yeah.
Like what are what kind of sequences would you be designing?
Well, it's good to know just briefly why. So, for example, if you go to your doctor and you're like, I have anxiety, but it's likely you have comorbid depression or ADHD or asthma or hypertension. So as a whole person, we're all struggling with all sorts of different things. And we go get treatment And we get treatment's siloed. It's like you get treatment for this one thing. Here's some anti-anxiety medication, or here's your hypertension medication. But you're a whole person with all sorts of struggles and need for support to thrive. So rather than siloing treatment, when we think about yoga, it's what's called transdiagnostic. So it targets things like sleep and emotional regulation and heart rate variability in order, because they're the things that underlie so many of these conditions. So we know yoga works, but we're not exactly sure the mechanisms. People think it's like the HPA axis and those sort of transdiagnostic factors, but we don't know about the sequences because we don't know who's designing them. We don't know what's in them. So what we are doing, we're running a randomized controlled trial for anyone with any sort of mental health concern, from stress to, serious depression. And we've got a sequence, and that sequence involves meditation and pranayama and some gentle postures, building up to sun salutes, some standing postures, and it winds back down, and includes a yoga nidra, which increases in length every week. And the research needs to be replicable. So someone else needs to go, right, well, this works if it ends up working. If this works, and it's divided up like this much pranayama, this much, asana. Right. And I think that's what we're all doing for ourselves, right? We've got this laboratory of our own experience where we're trying to figure out, okay, how much pranayama, asana, or yoga nidra or meditation is going to work for me? And I think that's one of the difficult things when you're so hardcore hooked on a system, is that there's little room to actually make sure your individual needs are being met.
I would argue it's not hooked as much as indoctrination.
Oh, tell me more.
No, but I think just to kind of build on that, I think that's true. I mean, I think you and I were very, very fortunate and lucky that our first introduction to yoga was through a different path,
yes,
right? So
exactly.
You started with meditation. Yeah. I also started with Buddhist meditation, and then simultaneously almost and then I practiced other styles of yoga before I did Ashtanga, which you did too. So already there's kind of an openness to yoga global as a discipline, as a form. And, experimented with some pranayama and learned about Ayurveda and was into all these different kind of modalities that were all kind of in this big, I guess, Venn diagram called yoga, right? Yeah. And then got really heavily into Ashtanga, but also the same year that I went to Mysore, I also met
Tiwari.
Yeah, Sri O.P. Tiwari, who was the head of the Kavalyadam Institute, whose main practice and all of their research is around kriyas and pranayama. Yeah. And so I always had these two gurus, bad lady.
It was always quite sus.
And two practices that I was doing simultaneously and devoting as much energy to at the same time. And within the culture, that wasn't encouraged.
Not whatsoever.
And so I was always kind of similar to you, kind of I got one foot in this camp, but I also have one foot in this camp. And also I just like yoga, all of it.
Yeah, I feel like, what's really interesting? I think that you're the original, no, not really, but what's his name? I'm Winston Smith. I somehow was at the bookstore and re-picked up 1984.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just this idea of group think, it's so appealing. And I think it is much easier. Yet I think in the end, it does us a disservice. It's helpful. I think it's helpful for a while because it gets people on their mat and it gets them that dose, but it can't persist forever. And being in a hierarchical relationship with a teacher, that has an expiry date in my opinion. Yeah. For you and for us all to kind of grow, we have to take responsibility for our own life ultimately.
Yeah,
I think that's absolutely fascinating, and I'm just kind of now rethinking or looking back on the first few years of Ashtanga yoga practice, and what techniques of indoctrination were occurring, and it was all kind of my first yoga class at all was an Ashtanga yoga class.
Yeah, right.
And then I just did that for 3 years, and nobody really talked. Everybody just practiced.
Okay.
And then occasionally there would be a kind of conference. I didn't realize at the time that he was kind of mirroring what Pattabhi Jois is doing. And in the conference, the culture was inculcated onto us. And he would talk about the violence of Pattabhi Jois. He would talk about, what he was like, and it kind of created a kind of a mystery that we could be intrigued by. And then at the same time, the teacher himself was coming back from Mysore every winter, and he would be thin and tan when he came back. And so I'm projecting onto him, my Western form of valors, that valorizes thin and youth in a middle-aged man. It's like, oh, he doesn't look like any other middle-aged man. He's a thin, tan middle-aged man. And I was like, wow. So, I'm being hooked.
Yeah.
As you said, I'm being hooked into, maybe you could help explain it to me better, but I'm being hooked into many kind of different layers of attachment. And I'm observing it and then desiring it and taking it and going after it myself.
I mean, it checks lots of boxes, right?
The word attachment is interesting because I think in the Mysore room, particularly for anybody who had insecure attachment with a parent figure, this provides this kind of secure attachment. It's like a daily presence. The teacher's there, you're there. And so then what starts to happen is people start to perform for the teacher, and there's a transference and a countertransference. So we have all of this transference onto the teacher and parentify them in a certain way, I think. And then the teacher has countertransference with how the student should be and how the student should behave. And I think for me, at least, what was protective is I didn't actually practice in that tiny old Charlotte with Pattabhi Jois, because I remember thinking, I'm not paying to sit in a line to do yoga. That's not a thing I'm going to do. So I went and practiced with Sharat in a smaller room, which was pretty casual at the time. But yeah, I do think it's easier for teachers. I think as many teachers enjoy the control and the distance of being an expert. So they're the expert and we shall follow their instruction. And I feel like emotionally, that's a much easier place to be. There's a kind of untouchability. There's an unreality to it as well, but there's an untouchability to that. And then those who get closer in proximity, who perform the way, and this is in lots of spiritual traditions, teachers want them to perform, they actually start to get benefits. You see that in the Ashtanga community. No one's allowed to do teacher training unless you're people, and then you're allowed to do Ashtanga teacher training. So it's an unusual way that people, I think, are playing out their attachment. And for some people, that wasn't what it was for me. It was a helpful container. But I think it did persist a little bit beyond what was helpful for me. Certainly did for Rob. Yeah.
But that's incredible, because then as a teacher, what I was also then seeking out was the same kind of archetype. Now I'm in control, and you're going to fucking do what I tell you.
Yeah.
And then everything falls into place for me as a personality.
Well, it's just smoother, isn't it, right? There's more students. There are a lot of people in the world who want to be told what to do. And it makes you a very popular teacher. But we see now, like we can look at the Ashtanga community and the teachers before our time, they all were like this, and this. And now they're starting to change their perspectives. And we're like, yeah, of course. Like we all knew that.
Right.
But yeah, it's basically for me, it's power, and it's the way power plays out. And so for me, when Me Too hit the Ashtanga community, that was actually really positive, because that kind of lack of kind of faith in how, lots of senior teachers behaved, and the way in which people wanted to retain their power at all costs was really interesting to observe.
Right.
I love this.
It is interesting.
And from all of your studies in psychology, it's so fascinating, because I feel like there's a lot of kind of unhealthy dynamics that go on. I mean, and we'll just talk about the Ashtanga lineage because that's what we're all like super familiar with. But it does happen in all kinds of other yoga lineages for sure.
And meditation.
But and meditation.
And academic.
Like Yoga Global.
And academic as well.
Yeah. But I think like what you've been studying and learning, and even like culture itself is kind of shifting into a more therapeutic kind of dynamic. And can you just like talk about the differences between those two structures? Because they seem actually like quite different, like the hierarchical versus, coming into a kind of creative space.
I kind of often think of it in terms of that vertical and horizontal relationality. And I think it begins with how the teacher wants themselves to be seen. And for me, at least, I'm uncomfortable with being pedestaled in that way because I'm quite aware when people do it at a certain point, they're going to have to rip it out. And I just don't need that sort of drama in my life.
It's a headache.
So now at Yoga's Place, for example, everyone's very mature and they're like, I'm here for my support. I want support, but this is my life. This is my practice. And I think people are quite uncomfortable with the in-between. So it's nearly like the more experience you get as a teacher, the easier it is for you to know what you're about and not need to rely on students for your self-esteem, for your professional identity, and to also understand, at least for me, that I can't save other people from themselves. And I may not be what they're looking for in a teacher because maybe right now they really want a teacher who's just really going to take that power over relationship and tell them what to do, and that will make them turn up 5 days a week. I don't think it's helpful in the long run, and I don't want to be anyone's paramaguru. So I think it's tricky. People find what they need, but then I think sometimes they stay in it a little bit too long, and that's very financially rewarding for teachers.
Yeah. I mean, there is some monetary benefits to maintaining that structure and maintaining that kind of control over
and
people.
Those relationships. Yeah. And to be honest, I think sometimes people aren't always aware of the level of control that they have over other people. I think they can be quite aware because in yoga traditions, we aren't trained to understand that, which is why, as I go on this journey to become a clinical psychologist, the ethical frameworks are so strict. There is such strong professional standards, and there's just not the same professional standards in yoga, which is which there should be because we're working with the whole person and it's such a vulnerable space.
Yeah. That's one thing that really became very apparent to me. I've done 3 coach certification programs, and all of them, I mean, even though coaching isn't, like therapy or psychology, but there are ethical guidelines. And if you're going to, apply to, be a national board or a internationally certified coach, you need to actually really uphold like very ethical standards, and everything needs to be very like upfront and explained, right? People need to know it needs to be an agreement. There needs to be agreements. And I think it's such a eye-opening thing because like you say, in yoga, we enter these relationships and there are no agreements.
There's not. And I think one thing that people can perhaps, if they're listening and wondering about their relationship with their teacher, it's like, what's your ability to ask questions? Do you feel comfortable? Do you feel comfortable saying no? And over time, I think our body our nervous system sends us messages and we consistently ignore them sometimes. These kind of red flags that are popping up before our brain even cottons on to this isn't healthy for me. As we start to tune in, we can feel something's not quite right. And I think when we're in some sort of guru shishya relationship, it's very easy to just keep pressing the off button on how that feels. But that feeling, that embodied sense, is just so essential to listen to.
Yeah.
I have a student who a long time ago I had a student who her previous experience had been kind of rather destructive, and she started dreaming about her teacher.
I used to dream about Patabi Joyce and Shrat. Did you both?
Oh, absolutely.
Even like
absolutely.
a month ago, I think before I did an interview with Peg, something came to me in a dream, but I was quite different in the dream. Yeah. I wasn't a student.
Well, just to say that this culminated in her dreaming about her teacher breaking her leg. And then she went into practice and was getting her foot behind her head.
Yeah.
And in fact, her fibula broke off her knee while being adjusted. And I was just amazed. I was just really stunned. Like the body and the mind knew she was in danger, knew that she was working towards a stress fracture, and was desperately trying to tell her. She was desperately trying to tell herself that she was in danger, but she hadn't been listening and didn't feel that she could say no to the adjustment.
Yeah. And see, I think this is a thing with trauma. I think it's something really important for us to remember. And when we think about, obviously we all know fight, flight, but there's also flop and there's fawn. And I think there can be a lot of fawn in spiritual communities sometimes. And I'm not commenting on this particular person because I don't know them. But what I have noticed is when people are little, they have survival strategies, right? So if they have an abusive parent, if they fawn and try to meet their every need, they survive. Or if they fight, they survive. Or if they run away and go to their friend's house, they survive. And then these strategies, they carry on in our relationships, and they certainly carry on in yoga, teacher-student relationships. And as a teacher, I feel like we have this huge responsibility to be consistently creating space for a student to have to ask them questions about their practice and what they need. And that's actually what we've started doing in our Mysore program recently, having workshops led by Rob, who's a clinical psychologist. And there's an hour of basically group therapy where there's a conversation that occurs about the practice. Because like you're saying, we're getting all these messages, but in a guru shishya system, we're told to we're kind of cut off from ourselves. And in that way, it's not very trauma sensitive. And we need to be gentle with ourselves if we have experienced trauma or early life adversity with the sort of context that we put ourselves in.
Yeah. Oh, that's so important. That's I hope people are taking notes.
And it's psychedelics. That's why I'm not like up here where I live. Everyone's I live just outside the city in the hills. I'm off at ayahuasca ceremonies with random hippies, and I'm sure they're nice, but I don't know, like it's dangerous. Like there's a danger to it. Yeah.
And I think that's so important. This is something we were talking about the other day, is how these tools like yoga, right, where you're sitting with like an uncomfortable sensation and learning to breathe and be with it and regulate are really powerful tools to have. But they can also be used in a very
inappropriate way.
Yeah, like in a manipulative way, right? Where instead of listening to what your body's saying, you're learning to
override it.
Now. Yeah. And I mean, we were talking about this with yoga, but also it can happen even like, you see this with the cults all the time. We're really into watching cult documentaries, right?
I love watching cult documentaries.
You have the work of...
It's quite informative in some
But you have this work of Byron Katie, which I know you're probably familiar with, right? Like the questioning your beliefs and turning it around. It really opens your perspectives and what else is true, what else is possible, recognizing that our entire reality is just made up of
beliefs. But then
beliefs.
People start gaslighting themselves. And this is
right. And it's dangerous.
It's dangerous. And this is how I ended up getting into academia, was through my PhD and looking at, because I was in so many Buddhist communities, and also hanging out with all of these people into Advaita Vedanta. There's no bridge, it's like, well, these are the ultimate truths. Well, who is the speaker? And everything is just consciousness. And it's like, but you're in a body right fucking now that's related to a socio-cultural context, you middle-aged white man, with all of your white man privilege. And
what about the kids? What about the kids? We just say, fuck the kids? That's how every conversation with the Advaita Vedanta goes. It's like, well, okay, are we going to take care of our kids now?
Yeah, and you have to build this bridge, and it does relate to ethics. It's like, yes, everything is consciousness, but hello, right now, you're speaking and telling someone, me, you, other, separation. what's your truth here? Like, what is your reality here? And how are you going to live up to your responsibilities? How are you going to help the world? How does that experience impact your day-to-day choices? And I think that's the bridge sometimes people don't make, and they live in their non-dual ultimate reality realm, but they're not actually, because they're still in duality, because they're teaching it to everyone and charging good money. And people get very confused. They get very freaking confused about how to be in the world.
Yeah,
freaking confused.
exactly.
That's confusing by itself. I should say that. I'm really interested in your PhD, and I don't want to go off on a tangent because this conversation is fantastic, and you've such an enormous basket, you and Rob, to give. It's like a little toy box in the yoga room where they can go in there, like get any kind of teaching they want out of that box, and it's really profound. But would you talk to us about what your PhD was in, what your focus was in
So
in
it's related to
non-dualism?
this conversation about trauma, which also often relates to gender. So essentially, my honours was looking at I just finished an honours that was on yoga teachers' beliefs about mental health. But when my first honours degree was in relation to Western women's experience and Buddhism. And that evolved into a PhD because I was sitting in these Buddhist monasteries, like, oh my gosh, like in Thailand or Malaysia or wherever I was, eating crappy food while all the nuns worked their asses off all day, meditated all day, all night, and the monks were just coming and going. And I was like, wow, what is this? So it just inspired an interest, and I was very into anything in relation to Advaita Vedanta or non-duality.
Yeah.
And so my question became around how I, as a woman, like the relationship between these experiences where it me, and some sort of recollection of an experience that is no longer an experience because there's someone having a recollection. And that person is gendered, me, a woman, and looking at the ways in which the conversation needed to happen between how these experiences could be translated into understanding the world. And for me at that point, it was in relation to sexual difference and gender. But more broadly, it led to bigger conversations for me about how spiritual practice links to social engagement. So how we can be of service. So, for example, the yoga space has given away about $1.2 million worth of free yoga in domestic violence shelters and prisons and all of those sorts of things, aged care, because it's the conversation that is sometimes lacking, is how those individual experiences where there is no one, how that then relates to being in the world. And, there's a great Ram Dass quote. I read it the other day, something about you may be seeing divine light, but it's no excuse to not know your postcode.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good.
Yeah.
Wow.
Building that relationship and that's what Rob and I are doing right now. Like, we do live in the hills. It's beautiful, but we're in it. We're like deeply in suburban life, 2 kids at school fees for their private school because the public school wasn't really good for them near here. We're working, studying. And on the outside, it looks very mainstream, but on the inside, it feels quite different. But I think people find it hard to be in the world. So sometimes that those kind of non-dual teachings are a real nice bypass of their emotional issues often.
Yeah, I think, I can relate to that so much. I mean, everything in me wants to just like leave society and go join some monastery somewhere. Like, say sayonara.
She's been this close to shaving her head all week.
I've been getting like doing that too.
So, but I think exactly what you're saying. When I look kind of back at my younger self, who was very everything was
orthodox.
Well, I'm going to say I just had all the time and space to read and study and practice and meditate and do pranayama and all day long. I mean, I was also living at a yoga retreat center. It really literally was all day long. Minus emails for the retreat center.
Yeah, I remember that phase of your life.
Yeah. And
crazy to think I've known you that long. because I remember that.
And like in a way, you feel like you're making progress and you're dealing with all your bullshit and
You're
like
not, right?
you're not.
You're not.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And there's it's just so I mean, you can kind of I think it's helpful like what you're saying, you can take a really big dose
Yes.
of the yoga.
Yeah.
And I think that changes you in some way.
Does. Yeah.
But then on the other side of it, when you're faced with like actual real life again and you got to pay bills.
Relationships.
Yeah.
Your parents, with your kids.
Exactly.
With each other. With friends.
Yeah.
With coming into relationship with the world. I think that's the real work.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then you see yourself and you see your patterns and then you have to actually like deal with them in some way. And you can't like asana it away.
No. Yeah.
And you can't breathe it away.
I was in the car with Jediah the other day, and it was really important to me that he listened to this Linda Ronstadt song. And I was really like, this is important. This is Linda Ronstadt. Linda Ronstadt's really important. It was Poor, Poor, Pitiful Me by Warren Zevon. I was like, this is something you have to listen to. And then I realized that he had his headphones on. He was listening to other music. And I thought we were together. And it was like, I was so extraordinarily triggered. I can't even begin to describe how maddened I was for days.
For half.
Yeah. And then, but what's cool is that we had a conversation about it. I talked to Harm because I needed to be talked down for beating the shit out of him. And I was like, this is Linda Ronstadt. And it was all the same stuff. With the yoga class, it was about power and attachment and wanting to transfer me onto him, which was not a consensual relationship at that point. Like, no, you must not do anything else but submit. And why are you not submitting to me?
So cliche, but it's just that saying: if you love someone, set them free. And people need to belong to themselves, and we get in the way of it sometimes if we're holding on too tightly to what we think they should be or how they should be. And I think that's also how marriages end. And yoga teacher relationships can end, and parents stop parenting their kids.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I love that. People need to belong to themselves. I think that's the whole essence of yoga, right? Is like learning how to belong to yourself.
And then you
learning
belong
how
to the world.
Yeah. Exactly. Learning how to like own your practice, do what's right for you so that you can like do something good with your time here on this planet.
I have to say, though, that having a conversation with your kid about how at the root of the conflict was one person wanting to submit the other.
Yeah.
And it was about power. And like he's 12 and we're having a complete conversation.
But it's it's such an important conversation because I think we go through the world and it's difficult because people are like, oh, my life is hard. Like I have suffered. And I'm like, true. Like we all have in our own way, but there's all different layers of privilege that intersect. And when we can see our own power, then we can be strong in the world, but also we can create space for other people to belong to the world as well in a different way to us.
Yeah.
But we could also have these conversations with our yoga students. This is kind of where I was coming to. It's like, instead of demanding that my students submit to me, but having a conversation about what their needs are and how I can provide them.
And it's a much healthier relationship. Even for me as a teacher, it's a much more comfortable space for me. There's a lot more ease now in the way I teach because I'm like, well, it's not my practice. I'm here to support. How can I support you? This is my opinion. But ultimately, they're not my decisions to make. And I think a lot of people aren't in that situation in many spiritual traditions. And that's something to it's a red flag.
Yeah, I think that's a big red flag. And I love that idea too of like what you described just balances like, yes, you're an expert in your field. And being an expert in your field you can still be that expert in your field, and that doesn't negate you being able to say, I'm here to support you. What do you need?
And I've heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes, it's like, well, you don't really know very much. You start to know a lot. And I think that's, 5-6 years into intense Ashtanga study, authorization, people are like, I know everything. And then before you know, and then when you become an expert, like what you both have been doing for like decades, then you're like, well, I know what's real and true, but also I'm quite aware of the limits of my knowledge and okay with that.
Yeah. And just the giving someone authority over their own body or their own health or their own choices doesn't take away anything that you have experienced.
No.
And I think sometimes we create this dichotomy when we're in this student-teacher relationship that if you don't do it my way, you're not doing it the right way.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so therefore you're not going to grow or you're not going to get the same benefits or whatever we're sort of projecting onto that rather than embracing, because it is difficult to embrace that there are a multiplicity of perspectives and ways. And actually, probably in the end, we're all going to kind of, get to where we need to be.
Yeah,
Hopefully.
exactly. Sometimes it's not the right time, and sometimes, yes, I think we all need to be open to our practice, to allowing life to change us.
Yeah. And then I think, as you're saying, adapting our spiritual practice with the changes that life brings, because I think that's really crucial. Is that life is unpredictable, and we have to be flexible in how we're responding to it, and that also includes our spiritual practice, right?
And if it helps people to know the research, a little while ago, a publication came out. It's quite high-level research that said it doesn't actually matter what style of yoga you do in order to have all of these kind of transdiagnostic, impact on your well-being. And I was like, wow, that's fascinating. Yeah. Or when they got all the studies and they put them all together and they're like, this is not working on style of practice.
Yeah, that's a good study.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a cold shower.
So before we close, what is it about yoga that actually helps to have these really profound effects for our nervous system, for our mental, emotional, cognitive health?
Is it the polyvagal effect?
Is it like just breathing and stretching and moving? Is it awareness? What are the things that are kind of
I think it's
the testing factors?
The top down and bottom up. So essentially the top down is we start to train ourselves to breathe, to move with awareness. And then what starts to happen is over time, when we're in difficult situations or we're dysregulated, we don't have to tell ourselves anymore. Our body just kicks in and reminds us, or just does it. It just we just take a deep breath. So it's dose. When we practice something consistently over time, it doesn't even have to be a lot. Some of the research is like 12 minutes a day consistently. Then we have this embodied sense of well-being that we don't need to direct our body to have. It just starts to happen.
Oh, it's fantastic. That when I was training school teachers, a metaphor that I would use for them was Chuck Yeager. And that when Chuck Yeager was like falling out of the sky in an airplane, he would go through a protocol of steps to get himself out of trouble.
Yes.
But the hardest thing about doing a protocol to get yourself out of trouble is remembering that you have a protocol.
Yeah.
And that you have to breathe to remember that you have a protocol.
Yeah.
And like remembering to breathe is the hardest fucking one.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing.
You have to practice.
It's creating the rhythm. If we have the rhythm of practice, it just can help carry itself. And I think that's why rooms such as Mysore rooms worldwide are so important if they're trauma informed and inclusive and you can question, because it just provides a container for all of that work and a sequence that, is adaptable. You can make it gentle in order for us to kind of heal.
Yeah, I love that. And also, would you say, just I hate ending. But
that's a symptom of ADHD, sweetie.
Would you say that it's helpful to include all of those aspects like meditation, breath work or pranayama and yoga asana, or is
what
one,
is a proper dose?
Yeah, like is one more powerful than another, or doesn't matter?
It's a really great question, and nobody knows the answer to that yet. And I think what's important, what I believe, my kind of hypothesis would be that a little bit of breathing, asana, and a little bit of breathing or relaxation training, simply because the postures give the nervous system something to work with. And that's why I like something stronger, like even if it's holding a goddess or an uttanasana or a squat, something that allows you start to find an intensity. You have to down regulate with your breath because it's that training ground for life. So I actually believe that asana is really crucial and essential to the process. And then you only have so much time for everything. If you can do a dynamic practice, you don't have to go to the gym or go on a jog. You want to take care of your health in a variety of ways. Yeah.
But including something that it sounds like to me like that has some eustress, is that how you say? Like an acute stress that
complete
is
the stress cycle.
Yes.
Yeah. And
is helpful that you can.
That's essential. Completing the cycle.
What's a stress cycle?
Well, there's like positive stress and negative stress.
Okay.
So it has a positive stress.
When you have early childhood trauma, for example, that's why people who have a history of early childhood trauma, they don't have a lot of heart rate variability. So quite often they have low heart rate variability, if I'm getting that right. I'm not really sciencey in that way. So we want to learn to regulate our nervous system. So to move in and out of activated and then calm. Yeah. So we want to have that flexibility. Yeah. The nervous system.
Right. So you introduce some variability into your nervous system in a controlled setting.
That's right.
Then you have a positive response, and then you're able to more proactively manage your dysregulated stress response in the real world.
Yeah. It's like a little microcosm of a bigger macrocosm. And that's why consistency is key. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Like Marichiasana D is helping you to learn to breathe through your kid acting out.
Yeah. Well, I would say Kapotasana does that.
Yeah.
All of it. It just depends. It depends which one you're on.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter which one you're on, actually, right?
And that's the whole point. I think Ashtanga works, because it's like a container. It's like 5-6 days a week. Do this thing. As long as, for me, you pop some yoga nidra in, or a little bit of much longer relaxation, and you don't push yourself. I don't pull myself into anything anymore. I don't pull myself into half lotus or leg behind the head. I don't get adjustments. It's just,
Yeah. And that speaks to like the intention of the practice too, in a way, right? Like kind of taking the ego out of it, or the trying to prove your worth through asana rather than like heal your body.
The body ages. It's a downward slide. I'm sorry, everyone. You can, although Mark Robbins is pushing back against that, but he's not going really just through Ashtanga yoga, right? So that's the thing. I do weights as well.
He's a middle-aged man. Yeah. I know that guy.
And sometimes your body does need more than just yoga postures.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for coming on and for such a beautiful discussion.
Yeah.
It was so great to connect with you again.
It was really good to speak with someone who speaks so quickly, because you really get a lot of information packed in.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know about you, but that episode left me feeling totally re-inspired to dedicate and commit to doing a regular yoga practice, to giving myself a dose of yoga every day, whether it's breath work or meditation or yoga asana. I am diving in full force for 2024. That's my commitment. What's your commitment? Are you re-engaging your practice if you let it kind of go by the wayside at the end of 2023? Or do you have a different goal, something else that you'd like to focus on for 2024? I would love to hear, what is your focus? How are you going to regulate your nervous system, create mind-body integration, develop more awareness, more love, compassion, justice? What do you want to focus on for 2024? What is your word or your intention? Mine is to really dive into deepening my spiritual practice. And part of that means using the tools of yoga and pranayama and meditation to deeply connect with my inner guide, with my God, and my higher wisdom on a daily basis. I'd love to hear what your intention is for 2024. DM me at Harmony Slater Official on Instagram and let me know. Let me know what you thought about this episode and what you're working on for 2024. I would love to know more about you and your dreams and aspirations and support you in whatever those might be. So I look forward to connecting with you over there on Instagram. And until next time, I hope that you have a beautiful practice and a beautiful beginning to your new year. That's it. We've concluded another episode of the Finding Harmony podcast. I just want to thank you so much for doing the work that changes the world, starting with yourself. It truly does make a huge difference. Please make sure you have your automatic downloads turned on wherever you listen so you don't miss any of the upcoming episodes. I have so much more magic I can't wait to share with you. Lastly, if you're on Instagram, I love connecting and hearing from you. So come on over and say hello at Finding Harmony Podcast. And you can also come say hello to me personally at Harmony Slater Official. Thank you again for being here. I cannot wait to share more with you in our next episode.